Well, as Washington's lawmakers remain at odds over the budget, and with the shutdown looming just hours away, we turn to ask the question of who will be blamed for the financial and political gridlock that's shutting down Washington. Joining me now for more is Seton Motley, president of Less Government, and John Brocker, former new media communications manager for the Democratic Governors Association. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Seton, I'll start with you. What are the implications politically for the Democrats if the government goes dark? Who's going to take the blame?
The Democrats are going to shut down the government because they will not accept a 1.6% cut in current levels of spending. They will not accept a 3.3% cut in the spending of the deficit. They won't accept a 3% cut in the deficit level of spending. They'll shut down the government over that. I think the Democrats are in trouble on this.
Do you agree? Do you think the Democrats are in trouble on this?
Lucy, I think what we're seeing more and more in news coverage is Americans are blaming Republicans for the shutdown. They're seeing that the Democrats are trying to get to the table time and time again, but the most basic of compromises that we try to get, we go more than halfway, Republicans won't meet us in any of those directions.
But gentlemen, I have to ask, I mean, isn't there a bigger question at hand here, which is why is it that the men and women we elect into office, regardless of what letter they have at the end of their name, can't seem to agree on basic legislative maneuvers?
Well,
they can't fund a government?
Well, the Democrats ran the show. They ruled the roost in all three branches of House, Senate, and presidency last year. They didn't write a budget. The only reason we're arguing about this is because the Democrats, when they ran everything, didn't write a budget for this year. We're trying to clean up the mess that the Democrats left last year. There's a $1.65 trillion deficit. They're going to shut down the government because the Republicans want to cut $65 billion.
Yeah,
that's absurd. That's absurd.
What party was in office when we had a surplus? In the White House.
The Republicans in the House and the Senate. In 2007, the last year, the Republicans wrote a budget in the House and the Senate, and a Republican president signed it. The spending was $2.73 trillion. In just 4 years, it is now $3.82. The Democrats running the show have increased spending by $1 trillion, a 33% increase in just the last 4 years. This is not a revenue problem. This is a spending problem. They won't back off $66 billion off a $1 trillion increase in the last 4 years.
Lucy, the bigger question is about moving goalposts.
What's bigger than $1 trillion in 4 years?
What's bigger than $1 trillion in 4 years is trying to make sure that we have negotiations in good faith, because half of one of the two parties in Congress right now is working hard to try to make a solution happen. It's hard to get both parties on the same side. It's hard. Bipartisan compromise.
If we look at the average American isn't, listening to these kinds of discussions. They're not reading every single detail about who's offering what plan and who's saying yes or no to whom. I mean, at the end of the day, it looks, to me personally, I think both parties are going to come out with giant black marks in both of their eyes, because it's going to look like the men and women that we elect into office are not going to be able to get things done. So how do you, and I'll stay with you, John, I mean, how do you convince voters that it's not just the ineptitude of our politicians in general?
Well, I think, to take a step back here, the greater problem, and this is one the Republican Party is going to face coming after this shutdown, is do we stay true to the Tea Party, which is the increasingly extreme wing of their party,
who elected 87 members of the House last year,
or do we try to serve the Americans that we were elected to serve? And so if they want to count out of the Tea Party, which they're more than welcome to do, they're going to go with the shutdown, which Tea Partiers support, but the Americans don't.
Well, I mean, I have to say, the Tea Party isn't some abstract thing. Americans voted Tea Party-aligned members of Congress into office. So
yes, 87 freshman Republicans in the House, based on the Tea Party. The Tea Party is driving the train because they drove the train last November.
I agree that the Tea Party is driving the train. Yes. The problem is that you have mainstream Republicans that are fighting with those Tea Party elements.
And that's to their detriment. The reason the GOP numbers have fallen in the House since the election is because we face a $1.65 trillion deficit, and they're cutting $66 billion. It's a joke, and the American people know this. And what's an even bigger joke is that the Democrats won't cut that much, which makes them look patently absurd, out of touch with reality, and they have no idea what's going on with the American people, basic economics, and what's happening in this nation.
But John, you were going to raise a point earlier. I mean, the Democrats had been willing to cut. It's just that the goalposts seem to continuously be moved on the Republican side. I mean, they've come to the table, they've said we're willing to do X, Y, and Z, and then suddenly the conversation changes.
Absolutely. And really the real joke here is how people like Speaker Boehner is going to deal with the political ramifications of this. When you're talking about his lieutenants like Eric Cantor, like Kevin McCarthy, who are in the wings trying to undercut him with this kind of Tea Party maneuvering, how is he going to maneuver out
versus Harry Reid, who won't cut the Cowboy Poetry Festival? Who looks more absurd? John Boehner, who wants to cut $66 billion, Or Harry Reid, who's defending the Cowboy Poetry Festival.
Seton, we both agree that cuts need to be had, but the problem is
no,
that
you don't.
The problem is that
we owe $1.65 trillion, and you won't cut $60 billion.
The problem, Seton, is that the cuts that Republicans bring to the table time and time again either rely on social agenda kind of items, which are
Wait a
just
minute, but it's
ridiculous,
also spending.
or that the cuts cut into things we need to be doing right now. We both agree. We need to be creating jobs right now. We need to make sure that we're cutting back.
The only thing the government needs to be doing right now is cutting.
Even a 2008 McCain advisor said that
who was not a conservative,
that the cuts that are going into this Tea Party budget right now will cut 700,000 jobs.
That's a fraudulent number.
We can't lose 700,000 jobs.
That's a fraudulent number.
Gentlemen, let's look at the bigger fight that's really looming ahead here, which is going to be whether or not we raise the deficit, the debt ceiling. Pardon. Do we have any indication that the same sort of lines are going to be drawn in the sand next month when the Congress will have to tackle that much more serious issue?
Absolutely. Look, we are not being serious about the deficit right now. The Democrat Party is a joke. $33 billion on $1.65 trillion is a joke. Cowboy poetry festivals, Planned Parenthood, which, by the way, the majority of Americans want to cut the funding to. It's a racist abortion mill, and so cutting social spending is also cut out the middle word. It's cutting spending. And we need to reduce the deficit. We need to reduce our level of spending. And whether you like it or not, cutting spending to Planned Parenthood is cutting spending.
John, I want to end with you. If the same sort of partisan divides get in the way of us raising the debt limit, what are the potential consequences for the American people next month?
I think the consequences of the American people are just as dire as they are now. We're already seeing, with the proposals put forth by the Tea Party Republicans, we have 800 border guards away from the border because of this kind of budget cuts. We have hundreds of thousands of jobs in jeopardy. We have tens of thousands of teachers' jobs in jeopardy. This is really crucial for the American people right now, and I hope the Republicans come to the table.
And both of you, I mean, how do you sell the message to the American people that, that anything is going to change in this fight?
I think that ultimately we know that the American people can see who's acting like adults right now, who's coming to the table and saying, we need to meet halfway, we need to make compromise happen. It's hard, but Democrats have been doing it, Republicans haven't.
Pelosi said that the cuts will kill 70,000 people. I don't think that's an adult assessment of the situation.
All right, well, a lot of divisions both in our studio and unfortunately on Capitol Hill. We'll see how it all plays out. Seton Motley, president of Less Government, and John Bruker, former New Media Communications Manager, Democratic Governors Association.